And now, Eagles Nation, hold on to this energy. The tone has shifted, the pressure is real, and from this point forward, every single snap matters. As we get closer to January, the playoff picture is tightening, and the Eagles enter this final stretch sitting at 9-5, alive, dangerous, and right in the middle of a crowded and highly competitive NFC. Nothing is settled yet, and that's exactly what makes this moment so compelling. There are clear paths, tough paths, even long-shot paths. But one thing is undeniable. The Eagles still control more of their destiny than many people outside this fan base want to admit. This franchise, with all its history, resilience, and identity, has proven time and time again that it rises when the challenge gets bigger. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe this team can make a real playoff run? Which game in this final stretch is the most critical in your opinion? Does this roster have what it takes to make noise in January? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because the voice of the fans is part of this journey. Stick with me, because in today's video we're breaking down exactly where the Eagles stand, what needs to happen from here on out, and why this stretch could define the entire season. And before we get into it, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps the channel, spreads that green energy, and shows that Eagles Nation is more alive than ever. Let's go, Eagles! When you look at the conference landscape as it stands, the Los Angeles Rams are holding the number 1 seed at 11-3 and have already clinched a playoff spot. That matters, because if you're dreaming about home field advantage running through Lincoln Financial Field in January, it starts with watching what the Rams do over their final 3 games. The Eagles would need help, a lot of it, but the door is not completely closed. For Philadelphia to somehow climb all the way to the number 1 seed, the Eagles would have to win out, finishing 12-5, while the Rams, Seahawks, 49ers, and Bears each lose twice, and the Packers lose once. It's a brutal set of requirements, and no one should pretend it's likely, but it is still mathematically alive. More realistically, the conversation shifts towards seeding within the top 3. The magic number to win the NFC East is 1. 1 win. If the Eagles take care of business against Washington, they would become the first repeat NFC East champion since 2004. That alone tells you how rare consistency is in this division and why this moment matters. Winning the division guarantees at least 1 home playoff game, and in this city, that's never a small thing. There's a strong case to be made that the ideal outcome for this team is the number 2 seed. If the Eagles beat Washington and then beat Buffalo the following week, suddenly the possibility opens up to rest starters in Week 18, depending on how everything else shakes out. That's not just about comfort. That's about health, recovery, and entering the postseason with as much physical and mental sharpness as possible. The challenge is that the Eagles do not hold the tiebreaker against Chicago, which complicates that chase. To get the number 2 seed, Philadelphia would need the Bears to lose twice, or the Lions to win 3 times, or the Packers to lose twice. Those scenarios are difficult, but not unreasonable when you look at the schedules involved. If the Eagles finish 12-5, they are guaranteed at least the number 3 seed. Even at 11-6, they still clinch no worse than 3rd. That matters because hosting a wild card game at the Link is a major advantage. Cold weather, a loud crowd, and a defense that thrives on chaos are not things opposing teams want to deal with in January. From there, you would hope for an upset elsewhere in the bracket to earn another home game in the divisional round. One underrated detail here is that the Eagles do hold head-to-head tiebreakers within the conference against teams like the Rams, Packers, and Lions. That gives Philadelphia some hidden leverage if records end up tied. It's not flashy, but it's the kind of detail that ends up deciding seasons. The remaining schedule is not easy. Road games against Washington and Buffalo are demanding, and Week 18 brings decisions that may depend on the standings across the NFC. Meanwhile, the teams the Eagles are chasing are dealing with tough slates of their own. Seattle has 3 difficult games. San Francisco's path is no picnic. Green Bay still has Baltimore and a divisional game in Minnesota. Chicago has to face Green Bay again, then San Francisco, then Detroit. Every week, something is going to shift. All of this creates a sense that the NFC is wide open. There is no unbeatable juggernaut. There are good teams, flawed teams, hot teams, and inconsistent teams, and the Eagles fit squarely into the group that can beat anyone when they play clean football. The margin for error is thin, but the opportunity is real. So as we head into this final stretch, the question isn't just where the Eagles will land in the standings, but how you, as a fan, feel about the potential matchups and paths ahead. Do you see this team making a deep run regardless of seed, or does the difference between the 2 seed and the 3 seed feel massive to you right now? What do you think about where the Eagles stand in this playoff race at this moment? If you zoom out and really think about it, this stretch run is less about chasing a perfect scenario and more about defining who this Eagles team actually is when everything tightens up. The standings matter, the math matters, but the bigger question is whether Philadelphia is peaking at the right time. That's what ultimately decides playoff runs. You can be the 2 seed or the 3 seed, but if you're not playing your best football, it won't matter once January hits. One thing that keeps standing out is how much pressure this team can put on opponents simply by being balanced and disciplined. When the Eagles take care of business early, they force other NFC contenders to scoreboard watch, and that psychological edge is real. Every win Philadelphia gets shrinks the margin for error for teams like Chicago, Green Bay, Seattle, and San Francisco. And the beauty of it is that the Eagles don't need chaos across the conference to feel good about their chances. They just need consistency. That's why the Washington game looms so large. It's not just another divisional matchup. It's a chance to lock up the NFC East and make history as the first repeat division champion in 2 decades. It's a chance to remove one variable from the equation and focus entirely on positioning and preparation. Once that division title is secured, every remaining decision becomes clearer, from how hard to push starters to how much to manage workloads. The Buffalo game that follows is another measuring stick. Winning on the road against a high-level opponent sends a message not just to fans, but to the entire NFC. It reinforces the idea that this team can travel, handle adversity, and win in hostile environments. Those are the exact traits you need when playoff games stop being theoretical and start being survival-based. What also makes this moment interesting is how unpredictable the rest of the conference is. There's no clear consensus favorite. The Rams are talented but inconsistent. The Seahawks are dangerous but flawed. The 49ers have pedigree but face a brutal closing schedule. The Packers are improving but far from unbeatable. That creates a window, and windows like this don't stay open forever. From a strategic standpoint, even landing at the 3 seed isn't some kind of failure. Hosting a wild card game at Lincoln Financial Field is a massive advantage. The energy, the noise, the weather, and the familiarity all tilt things in Philadelphia's favor. And if the bracket breaks the right way, one upset elsewhere could put the Eagles right back at home for the divisional round. This is why every snap over the next few weeks matters. Penalties, execution, focus, and effort are no longer small details. They're the difference between playing at home and packing bags for a short trip. The Eagles don't need perfection, but they do need urgency. As this playoff picture continues to evolve, one thing is certain. This team has put itself in a position where meaningful football in January is not just possible, but expected. How far they go will depend on how they handle these final tests and whether they can bring their most complete version of football when it matters most. And as this final stretch unfolds, the reality is that the Eagles are no longer in the phase of figuring things out. This is the phase where habits show up under pressure. Teams don't suddenly become disciplined in January if they haven't been locked in during December. What you're watching right now is the foundation for how this team will respond when the margin for error disappears completely. One of the most important elements in this playoff race is optionality. Philadelphia has given itself options. That's something not every contender can say. They can win the division early and manage the final week. They can push for better seeding if the door stays open. They can adjust their approach based on how the conference shifts week to week. That flexibility is valuable, especially when injuries, weather, and momentum all start to play bigger roles. Another factor that can't be ignored is how matchups shape perception. Fans naturally focus on who the Eagles might face in the first round, but the truth is that no opponent in the NFC is without flaws. Every potential matchup comes with advantages and risks. What matters more is whether Philadelphia forces opponents to play on its terms. When the Eagles dictate tempo, protect the football, and finish drives, they don't need perfect conditions to win. There's also something to be said about confidence built quietly. This team doesn't need national hype to function. It feeds off internal belief, structure, and accountability. That kind of confidence travels well and holds up when games get ugly. Playoff football is rarely clean. It's about surviving moments, not dominating highlights. As the standings shuffle and scenarios change, it's easy to get lost in percentages and projections. But at the core of it, the Eagles have already accomplished the hardest part, staying relevant deep into the season with everything still in front of them. Now it's about execution, 1 week at a time, 1 possession at a time. This is the point where contenders separate from pretenders, not by talent, but by composure. The Eagles have a chance to prove that they belong in that contender category, regardless of where the seed ultimately lands. Now I want to hear from you. When you look at this team heading into the playoffs, what's your biggest confidence point, and what's your biggest concern as this run continues? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about where you believe this Eagles season is really headed. What makes this moment even more intense is that the Eagles are entering the part of the season where narratives harden. Opinions stop being flexible. One bad half can change how a team is viewed nationally, and one strong performance can completely flip momentum. That's the reality of December football, and Philadelphia is right in the middle of it. The encouraging part is that this team doesn't need to reinvent itself to succeed. There's no mystery formula they're searching for. The path is clear. Play clean, stay physical, finish games. When the Eagles do those three things, they look like a team no one wants to see in a playoff bracket. When they don't, they become vulnerable in ways that good teams will exploit. That's the line they're walking right now. Another layer to this is experience. This locker room has been through playoff pressure before. They understand how fast a season can end and how unforgiving the postseason can be. That kind of collective memory matters. It sharpens focus. It changes how practice reps are taken, how meetings are approached, how small mistakes are addressed. You can feel when a team knows the window is open, and that's exactly where the Eagles are. The window is open. Not wide open, not guaranteed, but open. The NFC doesn't have a single team that looks untouchable, and Philadelphia has already shown they can compete with anyone when they're locked in. That's why the remaining games aren't just about wins and losses. They're about sending a message to themselves as much as to the rest of the league. Every snap from here on out is a rehearsal for January. Third downs, red zone trips, 2-minute situations. These are the moments that define playoff games, and how the Eagles handle them now will echo later. Seeding helps, home field helps, but readiness is what ultimately decides everything. So as the playoff picture continues to shift and the scenarios keep changing, one truth stays the same. The Eagles are still in control of how dangerous they become. No bracket can take that away from them. And that's why these final weeks shouldn't be viewed with anxiety, but with clarity. This is where everything you've watched all season starts to make sense. Strengths either hold up, or they don't. Weaknesses either get corrected, or they get exposed. There's no hiding anymore. For the Eagles, that's not a bad place to be, because this roster was built to matter late. What often gets overlooked in playoff discussions is emotional control. January games are emotional traps. One bad call, one turnover, one swing of momentum can snowball if a team isn't grounded. The Eagles, at their best, are steady. They don't need chaos to win. They don't need desperation football. They need structure and trust in what they do. When that shows up, they force opponents to press, and that's when mistakes happen on the other side. Another reality is that no seed guarantees safety. The number 2 seed doesn't promise a deep run, and the number 3 seed doesn't cap one. What matters is how sharp this team is entering the postseason. That's why the next few games are about stacking good habits more than chasing perfection. Clean communication, smart situational football, finishing drives instead of settling. Those details don't show up in standings graphics, but they decide playoff outcomes. There's also a sense that this team understands what's at stake. Windows in the NFL are fragile. You don't assume you'll be back. You don't assume next year will look the same. When you're in position now, you lean into it. The Eagles are in that position. They've earned the right to play meaningful football late, and now it's on them to make it count. As fans, this is the stretch you live for. Every game matters. Every result shifts the landscape. Every Sunday feels heavier. That's not pressure. That's relevance. And Philadelphia is right where it wants to be, with something real to play for. From here on out, it's simple. Win, and the picture gets clearer. Execute, and the ceiling rises. Slip, and the road gets harder. But nothing is out of reach yet. At this point, what you're really watching is a team being defined by how it responds to weight. Not hype, not projections, not power rankings, but weight. The weight of expectations, the weight of opportunity, the weight of knowing that every mistake now is magnified. Some teams shrink in that space. Others sharpen. The Eagles are being tested in real time to see which category they fall into. What's clear is that nothing about this situation is accidental. Philadelphia didn't stumble into relevance. They earned it by staying afloat through the grind of the season and positioning themselves where meaningful outcomes are still possible. That matters, because playoff runs usually don't come from teams scrambling for answers. They come from teams that already know who they are and are willing to lean fully into it. There's also an honesty that comes with this stage. You don't need to pretend everything is perfect. You don't need to sell a flawless product. The Eagles have areas that must be cleaner, moments that must be sharper, and stretches that require more urgency. Acknowledging that doesn't weaken belief, it strengthens it. It creates accountability, and accountability is what sustains teams when games tighten and momentum swings. As the calendar flips closer to January, every opponent becomes dangerous, not because they're unbeatable, but because desperation fuels effort. That's why discipline becomes the separator. The Eagles' ability to stay composed, avoid self-inflicted wounds, and play with controlled aggression will ultimately decide how far this goes. Talent opens the door. Poise determines how long you stay inside, and that's what makes this stretch compelling. There's no script. There's no guaranteed path. Just opportunity. Just pressure. Just football that matters. The Eagles have put themselves in a position where belief is justified, but outcomes still need to be earned snap by snap. So now it turns back to you. When you look at where this team is right now, not where you hope they'll be, not where you fear they won't be, but exactly where they stand today, do you feel this group is ready to handle the weight of January football? Or do you think there's still something missing before they can make a real run? And that question hangs over everything that comes next, because readiness isn't something you declare, it's something you reveal. The Eagles are about to reveal it, not in one moment, not in one quarter, but across a sequence of games where focus has to be sustained and details can't slip. This is where teams either confirm what they believe about themselves or are forced to confront what they're not yet. The margin at this level is razor thin. A missed assignment here, a stalled drive there, a lapse in communication at the wrong time, and suddenly the entire tone of a game shifts. That's why the Eagles' emphasis now has to be on control. Control of tempo, control of emotion, control of situations. When they play with that mindset, they don't look rushed, they don't look reactive, and they don't give opponents cheap momentum. What should excite you as a fan is that this team has already shown flashes of exactly that version. It's not theoretical, it's real. The challenge is sustaining it when the stakes rise and when opponents are just as desperate. Playoff football doesn't reward potential, it rewards execution under stress. The Eagles are no longer auditioning for relevance. They're auditioning for legitimacy. Every remaining snap is building toward that verdict. Whether the path runs through the number 2 seed or the number 3 seed, whether it starts at home or gets complicated later, the responsibility remains the same. Be the more disciplined team. Be the more physical team. Be the team that finishes. This is the stretch where seasons stop being remembered for what could have been and start